Okay, so I want to talk about bias and choice for unschoolers and for kids in public school. So it was mentioned that I didn't have access to a science lab as an unschooler, and that because I didn't have access to a science lab, my opportunities for learning science would be decreased. I don't agree with that. First off, I wasn't super into science, so I didn't really pursue all the options that I could have for learning it. However, what I did do was the easiest solution, which is to go to your local community college and take a biology class, and then you'll have access to a bio lab. And you might say, oh, well, you took a class. That's not unschooling. It is. Unschooling is about choosing the direction of your learning and letting the learner make the choices for their education. So I chose to go and take a class on biology. I chose to take violin classes and dance classes to learn those. Still unschooling. So yeah, the easiest thing, just if you've got a kid that's really interested in science and they want to go and do some lab work, then have them go to a community college. Done. Also, you can do a lot of, basic scientific experiments at home. Create your own scientific moments. One of my biology classes was some unschooling friends and I were on a beach, and we found a dead seal. Being the unschoolers that we were, the first thing we did was we went home and we got some gloves and some knives, and we dissected it and took pictures of all of its organs, and then found a textbook in a library that had seal anatomy in it and compared the pictures and tried to figure out what exactly we'd found on this seal. So create your own scientific experiments. Another solution might be, if you've got some kid that's really interested in science, find a local lab and have them intern or work for the local lab. So there's opportunities there. Okay, so what does this have to do with bias and choice, which is what I was originally saying in the at the beginning of this video. So public schools have the advantage in that they have a dearth of educational materials, books, and supplies that are right there at their students' fingertips with no cost to the parent. Unschoolers have to go out and find their own resources or use tools that are found in our everyday lives, and that requires, some creative solutions at times, and it also requires some dedication to go out and find materials, and that's exciting and challenging, and that's where bias and choice come in. Now, might be getting on touchy ground here. I know a lot of people think about homeschoolers being solely religious zealots who don't want their children to learn about evolution, so they keep them out of the school system. To me, that's a difference between homeschooling and unschooling. Homeschooling being school taught at home, and unschooling being the lack of schooling. And an unschooler would not believe in shoving a bias down a kid's throat. An unschooling parent, following the true principles of unschooling, allows the child to create their own opinions and form their own biases. So pulling a kid out of school so they don't learn about evolution is not really in the spirit of unschooling. So it's not what I'm talking about here. But I can talk about the school system and their viewpoints on creating bias and limiting choice. In Kansas, evolution is off the books. For another example, if you go to poorer urban areas, they might have books that are 15 years old because they can't afford anything else. So in different schools, you will have readily available materials, but you have absolutely no choice as to what those materials are going to be. Bias is inherent in everything that we do. We all have bias. I, surprisingly, am biased towards unschooling. Who knew? But school administrators, the people who buy the books that you or your children learn from, they have bias as well. And they are the ones that are picking the materials that you're reading, and that bias is going to be inherent in those choices. And because a student must attend school and must read all these books, they have to learn these materials that are given to them there. Alright, so who here is watching this video read A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn when they were 11 years old for history? Who here, when they were learning math, were allowed to choose from at least 4 different curriculums until they found a math textbook that they understood? Somehow I'm guessing I might be the only person who raised my hand to both of those questions. As an unschooler, I got to locate information. But when I did, I could choose what I wanted to learn. And I got to run the gamut on history books, standard as well as off the beaten path. And so I was able to learn not just your standard history, but also history that doesn't get taught as much in schools. When I was 13, I was, trying to lead this crusade to get my family to stop celebrating Thanksgiving, because I was like, this has nothing to do with pilgrims and Indians. It was just created during the Civil War, and it's not a real holiday, and we shouldn't celebrate it. So you, as an unschooler, have a choice to read alternative texts and get alternative viewpoints and then create your own bias based on the text that you've selected. And so you have a wider choice and thus less bias being shoved at you and more creating your own bias. So I know if you're like a driven student at school, you could definitely do this as well. You could go out and read some books that aren't assigned to you, but most kids that I know that went to school or are in school are too busy keeping up with their homework to actually go out and read something that doesn't affect their grades. Okay, so selection. Math. I was biased against math. I did not like math as a child. So I had a math book, and I hated it. And so my parents said, well, okay, here's a different math book. Let's try this one. Hated that one. Here's a different math book. Let's try this one. Hated that one. Here's a different... Oh. So after trying a few different ones, I finally found a math book where I was like, okay, this one I actually kind of get. Now, what would happen to a school kid in that situation? If they had a math textbook that they were being taught with in class that they didn't really get, they don't have the opportunities to look for alternative pathways. And honestly, if I hadn't had that math book, I don't know how much more math I would have done out of a textbook, honestly, because I just wasn't getting it. And the school kid in that situation is left with no recourse except to hate math more and more and more and not get it more and more and more because they don't have that choice that an unschooler gets. My whole learning style was all about choice. My education and my life were like going onto Wikipedia. I would read Foucault's Pendulum, and then I get interested in learning about Templar Knights, and I learn about them, and then I get interested in the Crusades, and I learn about that, and then I get interested in, the history of Britain, and I start reading about that, and then I get interested in Shakespeare because of that, and put on a play. I got to follow all of these little paths that opened up to me as I was reading and learning. And because I was allowed to explore the relations between all these separate things, I was able to understand them as separate entities better. In school, you have to follow a prescribed path, driven by someone else, and that may steer away from certain elements that would really